Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshifted.net/368, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check out Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 368th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, we are wrapping up the C&O But Slow with the patented takeaways episode. I've got 10 takeaways from this bike trip that, well, let's be honest. Should I have changed the title? I mean, I kept the title because it was always my intention, and I like to go into things intentionally, right? Well, is it the right descriptor? I don't know. I think it was slow. Maybe. It was certainly on the C&O. Maybe not as much as I intended, but hey, I started it there and yeah. Okay. Well, anyways, here's a 10 takeaways. These are in no particular order. And I'll be honest, they're kind of more like observations more than anything else. And well, hey, here we go. Number one is Unplanned Higher Mileage Day. Yeah. So the thing that sort of torpedoed, I think, the notion of the C&O But Slow was the fact that I had to change based on the fact that there were outside things happening, which of course is going to be the second note here. But I intended this to be, as I talked about in the preview episode, that this was going to be a slow and leisurely ride and things were going to be chill. And even up to, I think, the decision where I changed things up a bit, I was thinking, I'll just this will be still slow and leisurely, and I'll be sitting in the tent and I'll do some tent talking about reflections and stuff like that. But then I was just sort of like, no, that would really stink. So I kind of, everything was unplanned. And this goes back to, I think, a bunch of different things. If this weren't a podcast, obviously I wouldn't have said, hey, everybody, I'm going to be doing a slow ride. And then if the ride had changed, nobody would have cared, right? But because the nature of this ride changed because of point 2, which is coming in a moment, the title maybe isn't appropriate. But I'm going to go with it because I still like the title. And as I said, the higher mileage day didn't mean I did it any faster. I can assure you I was very slow in the last leg going up to the cabin. But, it ended up having that unplanned regular mileage day. In fact, that's a much higher mileage day than I really had intended to do. So we roll with the punches, don't we? We roll with the punches. Point 2, number 2 takeaway was changing routes due to the weather. So I came into the ride knowing full well that there was going to be some rain involved. I didn't anticipate that rain would have such an impact on things. First of all, there was rain that happened before the ride even started, particularly out west, particularly at the beginning of the trail. And that just mudded everything up. As you listened to and heard me talk about, the amount of mud that I got in my fenders was wild. And that really ended up putting a damper on the idea of kind of just like sticking it through. I've done that a bunch of different times, but I also knew there was some really big, heavy rains on the way. And even on that first full day of riding, I only caught a little bit of that rain, but it was pretty heavy. And I knew that that's the kind of rain that I was going to be getting. So in order to have fun, and I mean type 1 fun, real fun, not that type 2 fun that I keep talking about, but have real fun, sometimes you just have to roll with the punches. And I'm really kind of happy that I had the flexibility to be able to change my plans and change my routes really due to the weather. I mean, originally I was intending to stay on the trail long past Hancock. If the weather had been good and if conditions had been good, I would have ridden that trail all the way to Harper's Ferry. But that just wasn't in the cards this time. And frankly, again, I'm glad I did what I did. It ended up still being fun for what it was. And I got to mix in some spontaneous changes to the routes. And I think that that's all for the best. And that was really good. One thing I'll mention, I think, you know what? I'm going to mention that in point 4. So we'll get to that. Because I think that point 3, number 3 is the thing that maybe was the thing that I've I've kept with me the most, even though at the end of the day, it was really kind of minor. And in the moment, it was really more comical than anything else. But having the rolling coal incident, let's be honest, that was just weird. First of all, 2007 called and it wants its thing back. That's the first thing I'd say to this joker. But the other thing is that it had never happened to me before. I've obviously been in West Virginia for many years. And while I don't do a ton of cycling on the road out here, I do it. And for the most part, most of the people that I run into, totally cool, totally fine. I just think, and as I mentioned in the moment, I do think that for whatever reason, there is this weird permission structure, and it's not just here in West Virginia. It's in a lot of places that say, hey, if you're in a big truck, it's cool to do that and mess with cyclists. And it's dangerous and it's stupid and it wrecks their truck, and the whole thing is just dumb. And it speaks more to the person that did it than anything else. But no. It's just like, that's probably the first time I ever had a driver do more than throw words at me. And it just kind of speaks to where our society is to a certain degree. And it's a bummer. And I hope none of you have ever had to deal with it and never will have to deal with it. I also have to say, this guy was really bad at it. It didn't even really hit me all that much. I mean, I kind of got a little bit of a whiff of it. So the fact that this guy sucks at what he does is whatever, right? So that was point number 3. I don't even want to dwell on it too much more, other than to say that I think it's a good reminder that not everybody on the roads that we cycle are interested in our safety, and some of them are actively trying to wreck our safety. And so that's unfortunately something we got to deal with. And so stay safe out there, everyone. All right, number 4, gear issues. So let me talk briefly about mechanical stuff first. The gearing situation, as it turns out, was due to the fact that I had a bunch of crazy things wrong with the bike that's currently actually in the shop getting fixed. There were some problems with a variety of things, mostly in the rear wheel. Stuff was really worn in a bunch of different places, and it's kind of a bummer because I had gotten the work done at a different shop, one that I had liked quite a bit, and either I rode it really hard, or the components that they used didn't go very long, or a variety of different factors. But I was a little disappointed that I had to throw a bunch of money at this bike again so soon after I last got it looked at. So I think that was one thing. I am really glad that it happened in a sense that it was so noticeable, though, because it kind of forced me to go get the bike retuned and refixed and a whole bunch of things handled at this other shop in advance of the next tour, which, as you all know, is in Oregon. And I'm going to be relying a lot more on the shifting abilities of this bike a lot more than I was on this trip. And so in some ways, the gear issues was kind of okay. The other thing that I'm doing is I was really considering doing some more dramatic changes to the bike, but I decided to kind of keep it mostly the way it is, including the gear shifting. I was going to go to trigger shifting, but I decided to finally replace the original twist grip shifts on this thing. They were original to the bike since I got it. So that bike is more than 10 years old. And if you're not aware of things, with anything with rubber in it will eventually degrade over time. I used to blame it on getting some DEET on there, and I'm sure that didn't help things. But yeah, the rubber on the grips had been degrading, and it was such a mess, and I was just putting it off. And so I'm getting that done as well. And so it's going to feel like a relatively brand new bike when I get it back, which should be very soon. As the things that I did to kind of help it along, I think speaks to my expanding ability to do bike mechanic adjacent stuff. I would never call myself a bike mechanic by any stretch of the imagination, but the go adjustments were really helpful and got me through it. And the chain skipping and all that other kind of stuff, there was a reason for it. It wasn't because I hadn't indexed it properly. It was because there was stuff wrong with it. And so there was that. One other thing I want to mention is with the gear issues is the fenders and having them kind of get caked up with mud. I got a note from someone that suggested that my fenders were adjusted improperly. No, not true. There was plenty of clearance. This is not my first rodeo on the C&O. I know how to handle fenders on that trail. In fact, they have, if anything, too much clearance compared to how you would normally put a fender. However, the mud on the C&O is unique. And it is unique in the sense that I've never ridden on a surface where the mud has so much clay in it that if it can find any little corner to start to accumulate, it will. And it just, when it's in the proper, perfect conditions, it is just peanut butter, like lumpy peanut butter. And it is really wild. Now, it's not always like that. So if you've ridden the C&O and you've had a little bit of the mud on you, I would say most of the time, the C&O mud will clear. It's fine. It's any other type of mud. But if you get that perfect combination of rain and no rain and everything and the timing and everything like that, it really, really gunks up things. And it is impossible to deal with. And I just knew that was the case. And with more rain coming, I knew that was going to be an even bigger problem, which is the reason why I ended up making this into a road route when all was all said and done. So yeah, the gear was not perfect for me on this ride, but hey, that's also part of these bike adventures, right? All right, lights. I'm really glad that I brought all of the lights that I did, including my headlamp, because this was ultimately a safety kind of a thing. Take it from the very first night, day 0 or part 1 or whatever we're calling it. The lights that lit up the trail got me much more into the concept of night riding. And if you're going to be doing night riding, whether you're on a trail or a road, it's really important that you have this stuff for safety. In that instance, it wasn't so much to be seen, it was for me to see. And I really, really liked it, and I felt safe, and I banged out all those miles in a really robust way. So I'm super excited about the prospect of doing some more night riding in the future, maybe more likely on a trail scenario rather than on a road. But, I'm very interested in that because I think that that's a safety issue, the ability to see. Of course, the ability to be seen was super important for the road riding that I did. And most importantly, on that day that I rode up to the cabin trying to beat the rain, because I had all the sunlight that I needed. I got back before sundown, but having all of my blinkers on and all of my lights on was really important. I think I have fully become a fan of rechargeable lights because they seem to have more capacity than replaceable batteries at any given point. You can recharge them. You can top them off at any given time. So knowing I had a full charged battery in all of my lights really made a big difference in terms of my confidence going out there. And I have had trouble with a really nice brand of rear bike light that is battery operated. I've ended up giving that to Kimberly for her bike. But I found that sometimes you have to take the batteries out and kind of rebend the terminals on them to get it to work. I've just run into some problems with those that I haven't in these rechargeables. Your mileage may vary. I know that there's really strong arguments for replaceable batteries in those things, but my rechargeable ones have been rock solid and I've really enjoyed them. But so important to have them on you for safety. I know that there's a lot of people, I shake fist at Sky for the folks that have blinky front lights and they're riding on trails. That drives me nuts. I think that's actually the reverse of safety. I think that ends up imposing safety problems on oncoming bikers, including me. But for the most part, I love lights on bikes. I just love them. And I think that is a really good thing to have in any of your rides. Number 6. Honestly, make this global, man. Throw this in every podcast. It's the importance of being flexible. If you go into any ride thinking if you don't hit every single mark, your trip is ruined, I think that you're going to find yourself disappointed. And to me, the importance of staying flexible allows you to still have fun and to go, hey, you know what? The fact that I did change was part of the fun. And that's what I really loved about it. I had weather, I had route changes, I had a whole bunch of other things that came out of this ride that if I was like, oh, I have to get to Harper's Ferry or this trip is ruined, man, that just wouldn't have been good. I mean, I even built in flexibility by having those 2 train tickets, for crying out loud. I think it was kind of part of the entire ride there. And it's really interesting because I compare and contrast that to the ride in Oregon last year that was it wasn't just Oregon and California, that transitated ride to San Francisco. If one thing had gone wrong, the whole thing would have been borked. And I did have a day in there, but I think because one of the buses didn't run, it would have thrown things off really, really awfully. So that one, I was taking a little bit more of a risk and of a chance. I think it's always better, especially the longer that you're going, to have that flexibility that's built in. And I suppose there could have waited a day and just would have figured things out. But it worked out about as well as it could on that ride. This ride was all about changing on the fly and staying flexible. And I think it was a better ride because of it. If I had just pushed through, I think back to the guy who I met on the train, I didn't get the impression that he had any other plan except for get on bike, ride trail, and go all the way to DC. And I just think that was probably a bad weekend for it. And I hope dude had a good time. And I hope he made it. And maybe I was just a big baby about the whole thing. But yeah, I liked being flexible. And it was lucky too. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have this cabin where it is on the trail. It just ended up working out really well for me when all was said and done. All right, number 7, strategic 0 days. Man, I don't take enough 0 days. I don't plan enough of them. Sometimes I put them at the beginning or the end of a tour and not thoughtfully in the middle of a tour like I should. I need to do better with that. My next tour, I did not do that. It is very much scheduled from beginning to end to be all the way through with no breaks whatsoever, about a week of riding. So maybe I need to kind of listen to my own takeaways a little bit more, but schedule them in. I used to be kind of anti-0 day because I think this is still a problem I have, and you can tell me this. I am just sort of like, I'm starting here and I'm ending there and I'm doing it in as efficient a way as I can. Yeah, I need to bake in some more 0 days. C&O But Slow with some 0 days. That's where I think you can argue that I kept the title and kept the title in a good way. It helps you to have more fun. You take the 0 day and a day where you have access to amenities, a 0 day when you want to avoid weather. It's just a really good thing to have. And so that goes back to being flexible, especially with the weather type of situation, that bake in some extra days so that you've got the ability to take a 0 day when you want to or when you have to. And I got to make sure I do that one of these days. I think part of it is that when I start having the ability to have more flexibility with my schedule, I think I'll be able to do this a little bit more. But unfortunately, for the last few years and probably definitely this year and for the near future at least, my ability to do kind of unrestricted time just isn't really there. And I do look forward to that. I look forward to having trips where I just kind of say, hey, I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks and I don't necessarily have such a strict schedule that I have to be at. And I really think about someone like Mysterious James, who has way more flexibility in his schedule, and like, oh, that's great. One of these days, we'll get to that. All right, number 8. Food and hydration management. I drank a lot better on this trip. I drank a lot of water and I felt a lot better. This is something that all the bike people keep telling us, right? All the smart people say, drink before you're thirsty. And it makes a big difference. I will tell you. The other thing was electrolytes. It really helped again on this trip. I've taken the pills for years, but this was a new one. I took the Amazon's kind of Pedialyte replacement, for lack of a better term. It's basically that. Now, there was dextrose in it. I did end up finding out. So obviously, it was also helping me feel better from a sugar perspective. So I think I'm going to keep using stuff like that. I really hate imbibing sugar. And lately, it's I not to get into it too much, but I really would like to avoid that kind of stuff even more. But I think that on the bike, it's a really handy thing just to help fuel you. It's instantly available. You're gonna need sugars when all is said and done. You're either gonna convert stuff in your body from glycogen into that, or you're gonna burn what you put into you, and that's just straight up fuel at that point. So I do think that that's something that I've noticed makes me be able to bike a little bit better, more easily available sugars. And I think that I'm starting to learn also that it's better for me to maybe drink those. How many times have you heard me say, I just had a Coke and I feel freaking amazing, or I just had a coffee and I feel great? It's like the caffeine, the sugar, the liquid thing, I think is just really, really helpful in kind of where my body is at these days. And I think that's good. In terms of food, I think I'm also starting to think that I eat too much like a big meal as a part of my riding, and I really want to break that up a little bit more. I think back to my typical thing where I sit down and eat a 6-inch Subway sub in the middle of the day at Pawpaw, and it's like, I mean, yeah, it's great. It gets me through the rest of the day, but I am always struggling, I find, by 10 miles out, by the time I hit the Western Maryland Rail Trail going into Hancock. And I keep thinking, I wonder if it's because I just have this gigantic freaking sandwich in me rather than doing the little small stuff that I can more easily digest and convert into energy. So going to be thinking about that a little bit more for future riding. It's like I'm constantly learning on this stuff. I think our bodies are changing, everyone. So I feel that's the case with me. I am no longer in my 20s. That is for damn sure. Number 9, navigating new routes. This was kind of the fun part of this element. There was nothing new about any riding I did except for the last day. And even that was reasonably similar. But I will say I took a different road route to the train station than I had before. And it really made all the difference. The way that I had gone before, for lack of a better way of, I can't visualize this obviously in this medium, but think of a triangle, the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and that c, the hypotenuse, the diagonal, that's always shorter than the a and the b together. Well, that's kind of what I did. And I didn't do it before because I was like, oh, I don't know that road. Oh, that's going someplace crazy. And I'm glad that I actually let Google Maps kind of do its magic on that. Sometimes Google Maps will send you astray. I've definitely had that. But this way was a much better route, and it cut off being on busier roads on the A and the B. The C was a bunch of not so busy roads, and I much, much preferred it. It actually, I think also because of math, thank you Pythagoras, was shorter. And I thought that was pretty cool. So not being afraid of new routes, even though you're kind of like, oh, well, I've never done that before. I think that's a pretty good idea, pretty good way to approach things. And it added a little element of adventure on that last day where it was sort of like the biggest adventure was, am I going to make my train, right? So navigate those new routes when you've got the ability to do them. Try them out. Go exploring. I think that's just all a really good idea. Last but not least is just kind of a reflection on the whole element of the pace and the experience of this ride. I guess as I've been talking through this, I can safely say that, yeah, you know what? The C&O But Slow is still a good title. The 0 day was something that added into all of that. My pace was never like some breakneck kind of a thing, even though on that last day I was kind of under the gun a little bit, but I knew I had plenty of time, and I ended up waiting for the train quite a bit by the time I got there. So despite this being a more challenging ride than I kind of expected, I did not expect to feel challenged at all in this. And the big long mile day certainly was more challenging than I intended. This was still a valuable, fun experience. And I think that when you look at the whole thing, the importance of the pace that you go at, are you enjoying the ride? Asking yourself that question as you're going on. I mean, just go back to Lyle Wilcox for a little bit. Lyle Collins, is that a receiver for some team? Anyways, oh no, he's a lineman for the Bills now. That's where I've heard that name. Lyle Wilcox. She's riding hundreds of miles in a day, and she's like, I could still keep doing more. I'm just having so much fun. And I think about that, and I think about it doesn't matter what you've been doing, the miles you've banged out. And the question you almost always want to be asking yourself is, are you enjoying this? Sure, there's room for type 2 fun, and there's room for kind of like punishment days or whatever. But at the same time, we do this for fun. And this was fun at the end of the day. the prep that I put in, I have fun doing that. It pays off later. The flexibility and the resilience I have. Flexibility was important for kind of figuring out how to avoid the stuff that I didn't want to deal with, those couple of rainstorms that happened. Resilience, the ability to kind of cowboy up and say, all right, I could camp here, but you know what? That doesn't seem as much fun, and I might run into some rain. And I would have if I had stayed in Hancock and ridden back in the rain. That would have been a lot less fun. So having the resilience to say, okay, I'm going to take a long break and I'm going to ride back to the cabin from here, even though I've done way more miles than I intended, and I'm going to do 20 more on top of it. That all matters. And I think that's what I got out of this particular ride. Like every single ride, even if it's one that I've repeated a bunch of different times, I get something new out of it. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the idea of the C&O But Slow. Even though it didn't turn out exactly the way I'd envisioned it, I think I got out of it what I wanted to. And so that's a successful bicycle adventure as far as I'm concerned. All right, so those are the 10 takeaways. I hope you enjoyed this. I got some nice feedback on this trip, and I wasn't expecting that. I thought this was a kind of a mundane type of a thing, but I think people liked the idea and liked the vibes off of it. So I'm glad that happened. Best of comes at you next week, and that'll be a fun one and relevant as well. And then we continue with the celebration of a decade of pedal shift. Still crazy that it's been 10 years. And we're going to be kicking off the Oregon Coast remix with a preview episode. And the week after that, and we're going to be kicking it off. So super, super excited to share the Oregon Coast remix with you. All new campsites, all new adventures. Even though it's a familiar route, it's going to be all new to me. The pacing of it's going to be all different. It's going to feel like a completely different ride, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's kind of exciting to me. And I hope it ends up being fun for you to enjoy and listen to. So thanks so much for joining. We'll see you next time.
And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community. Expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullum, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Lazewski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponsella, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Sarus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.